Fear in the ruins. The wind howled across the broken desert, carrying dust through the skeletons of ruined towers. Shadows stretched long as the red sun dipped lower, throwing the land into a haze of gloom. A lone human, weary and scarred, walked slowly among the crumbled stones, his boots crunching on cracked earth. His ship had crashed days ago, and ever since, he had searched for food, water, and any sign of life. Every step echoed through empty streets, but he was not alone. From the dark corners of the ruins, small eyes watched him, wide and unblinking. The human paused, sensing something, though he saw nothing but dust and silence. Still, he could feel it, the weight of a gaze, the tension of someone too afraid to move. Behind a half-broken wall, a tiny figure crouched, her body trembling. She was thin, almost fragile, her skin pale with faint markings that shimmered like moonlight. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled, and her eyes, large and glassy, locked on the towering human. Her people had always whispered about humans, stories of giants who devoured the weak, monsters who ate alien children whole. Fear froze her body, every muscle screaming to run, yet hunger chained her in place. She had not eaten in days, and her small hands clutched her stomach as it growled. Still, she thought, better to starve than to be swallowed by this creature. The human stepped closer, scanning the ruins, his shadow stretching long across the cracked stones. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, silence held them both in place. The human tilted his head, his expression unreadable, while the tiny alien girl pressed herself tighter against the wall, her heart hammered in her chest, her eyes wide with terror. He raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. His voice came low, calm, easy, he said, though she could not understand his words. To her, his voice was a deep rumble, frightening, yet not sharp, not cruel. Still, she shook her head, whispering in her own tongue, "Don't eat me, don't eat me." Over and over, the human crouched, moving carefully, as if approaching a wild animal from his pack. He pulled a small piece of food, a ration bar wrapped in silver. He unwrapped it slowly, breaking off a piece, and placed it gently on the ground between them. Then he backed away, raising his hands again, showing her that it was hers if she wanted it. The girl blinked, confused. She had expected fangs, claws, an attack, but instead, the giant offered food. Her stomach growled louder, twisting in pain, her body begging for what her mind feared. She stared at the food, then at him, then back at the food. Minutes passed, long and heavy, the silence broken only by the distant cry of wind through stone. Finally, hunger won. The girl crawled forward on weak arms, her eyes never leaving the human. Her small fingers grabbed the food quickly, snatching it as if it might vanish. She shoved it into her mouth, chewing fast, tears welling in her eyes as flavor filled her tongue. It was sweet, soft, unlike anything she had eaten in days. Her body shook as she swallowed, relief washing through her like warm fire. And still, the human did not move, did not strike, did not harm. Instead, he sat down slowly, leaning his back against a broken pillar. He pulled out another piece of food for himself, eating calmly, his eyes resting on the horizon, rather than on her. It was strange, almost unsettling. If he were truly the monster her people had spoken of, would he not have devoured her by now? The girl licked her lips, tasting the last crumbs. She stared at him again, confused, her fear shifting into something different, suspicion mixed with curiosity. Why would a human feed her instead of eating her? Why would a giant share food with someone so small, so weak? The sun dipped lower, shadows thickening around the ruins. The girl pulled her knees to her chest, glancing at the darkening sky. She knew night would bring dangers, creatures that prowled, hungry and merciless. Her people had always said, "Stay away from humans." But now she wondered, what if they were wrong? The human noticed her glance, the way her body trembled at the coming night. He looked at her once more, his eyes softer now. Without a word, he shifted his pack closer to her side. A silent offer of safety. Her small body tensed, but this time she did not retreat. The desert wind carried the scent of sand and old stone, the ruins whispering of forgotten times. The human leaned back, resting, his weapon by his side but unused. The girl curled tighter, watching him carefully. Fear still burned in her chest, but deep within, a tiny spark flickered. Hope, she whispered to herself, so quiet, it was almost a thought. Maybe he will not eat me. Her eyes grew heavy, exhaustion pulling at her small body. The human, hearing her soft voice, though he could not understand it, let out a slow breath. He closed his eyes, but kept one ear sharp to the darkness, guarding not only himself, but her too. And so, in the ruins of a dead city, a starving alien girl and a stranded human sat side by side. Neither spoke the other's language. Neither trusted fully. But the first step had been taken. Fear had not vanished, but kindness had cracked its shell. The night grew colder, the shadows deeper, but together they endured, and the story of the girl who thought she would be devoured had only just begun. The first act of kindness. The night was colder than the day, and the ruins groaned under the weight of silence. The human sat near the broken pillar, his body still and his mind alert, listening to the shifting winds. Beside him, the tiny alien girl shivered, curling into herself, her arms wrapped tight around her thin frame. She had eaten the ration bar quickly, but the warmth of food was already fading, replaced by fear once again. The stories of her people returned to her mind, stories of humans, with teeth like blades and hunger that never ended. She stared at him through the dark, her wide eyes glowing faintly in the pale light of the broken moon. The human seemed calm, his face tired but not cruel, his body resting but not threatening. Still, she whispered to herself, "It must be a trick. He waits until I sleep." Her stomach growled again, sharp and painful, echoing in the cave of her chest. The human's eyes shifted to her, not with anger, not with hunger, but with concern. Slowly, he reached into his pack, pulling out another small bundle of food, this time dried fruit. He did not toss it, he did not force it. Instead, he set it gently on the ground between them, then leaned back once more. The girl's breath caught, her heart racing. Why would he share again when he had so little? Was this kindness or a trap? Her hands trembled, torn between fear and need. The human broke a piece for himself, chewing slowly, showing her it was safe. The gesture was simple, but powerful. For the first time, she felt doubt about the warnings of her people. Perhaps humans were not hunters of children. Perhaps they were something else. Hesitantly, she crawled forward, her small hands brushing against the cold stone. She took the fruit, watching him carefully. Her lips touched it, and again. The taste was strange but sweet, filling her with warmth. Tears welled in her eyes as she ate, because the fear that had always chained her was weakening, even if only a little. The human did not speak much, only watched the horizon through the cracks of the ruins. But when she glanced at him, she saw something different in his eyes. Not hunger, not cruelty, but something her people had never described. Patience. He seemed willing to wait, to let her choose trust on her own time. The girl swallowed hard, licking her fingers of the last crumbs. Her voice broke the silence. A single word in her language. "Why?" The human tilted his head, not understanding, but sensing the meaning. He only pointed at her, then at the food, then placed his hand flat over his chest. The girl blinked, her mind struggling to grasp the strange gesture. But deep inside, she understood. It was not about taking. It was about giving. Her people had taught her that humans only consumed, but this one had shared. And in that sharing, something inside her began to shift. The night stretched on. the wind carrying distant howls of unseen predators. The girl flinched at the sounds, curling smaller, her tiny hands shaking. The human noticed, and without a word, he dragged a piece of broken wall closer to block the wind. It was not much, but it shielded her from the cold and the cries. Her eyes widened at the act, for it was another kindness, unasked but given. She whispered again, softer this time. "Why?" The human met her gaze, his eyes steady, and though no words passed between them, she felt the answer in her chest. He did not see her as prey. He saw her as someone worth protecting. Hours passed, and exhaustion pulled at her small body. Her eyelids grew heavy, her head lowering until it rested lightly against her knees. Still, she fought sleep, afraid that the moment she closed her eyes, the human's teeth would show. But her body betrayed her. Slipping into slumber, weak and weary, the human watched her quietly, his face softening. He adjusted his position, placing himself between her and the open night, his weapon near his hand. He did not know who she was, or why she feared him so deeply, but he knew this. No harm would reach her while he breathed. The girl stirred once, mumbling in her sleep, her voice fragile. Her words were in her language, but they carried weight. "Don't leave me." The human could not understand, yet his chest tightened at the sound. He whispered in his own tongue, low and steady, "I won't." The ruins held their silence. The stars glittered faint above, and the night stretched endlessly. A human and a tiny alien girl, bound not by words, but by food, by patience, by small acts of care. She had feared he would devour her, but instead, he gave her what little he had, and though fear still lived inside her, kindness had begun to take its place. By morning, when the sun rose pale and weak over the horizon, the bond between them had already started to grow. Neither trusted fully, neither understood the other's words. But in the ruins of a forgotten world, a strange partnership had been born, not of fear, not of hunger, but of an unexpected kindness. A growing bond. The morning light crept slowly over the ruins, turning stone and sand into shades of red and gold. The human stretched his arms, his body stiff from sleeping against cold rock. Beside him, the tiny alien girl stirred, blinking her wide eyes at the rising sun. She sat up quickly, as if afraid she had slept too close to him. Her body tense, her heart pounding, but when she realized he had not moved toward her during the night, her fear softened, even if only slightly. He gave her a faint smile, a small curve of his lips, and pulled out another ration piece from his pack. Again, he placed it on the ground between them. Careful not to frighten her, she hesitated, but hunger pulled her forward, and she accepted it. Though her eyes never left his, as she ate, he began to show her small things. He struck 2 pieces of metal together, sparks flying into dry leaves until fire came alive. The girl gasped, crawling back at first, but when the warmth touched her skin, she crept closer again. Her hands hovered toward the flame, her face glowing in its light, her fear mixing with wonder. The human noticed and pulled a stone closer, flattening a surface. He placed the food over the small fire, letting it warm. He gestured to her, showing that food could taste better this way. She tilted her head, unsure, but when he handed her a piece, she tasted it carefully, her eyes widening in surprise. For the first time, she gave a small sound that was almost a laugh. It was weak, fragile, but real. The human chuckled too, not understanding her words, but understanding her joy. And in that moment, something invisible passed between them. Trust beginning to take root. Later, he showed her how to drink safely from a cracked water pipe. He filled a small container, boiling it over the fire, then cooling it before handing it to her. She sipped carefully, her lips trembling, the water clean and fresh compared to what she had known. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she looked at him without pure fear. Still, the stories in her mind lingered. Her people had warned her that humans were dangerous, Predators in disguise, she whispered under her breath. Words he could not understand. Why are you different? Why not devour me? But his actions kept answering, louder than her fear, as the day stretched on. They moved together through the ruins. The humans searched for supplies, lifting stones, breaking open containers, always keeping her close, but never forcing her near. The girl followed at a distance, her small steps quick, her eyes sharp. Every time danger stirred, the cry of distant creatures, the rumble of shifting stone, he placed himself between her and the threat. At first, she thought it was instinct, like a predator claiming territory. But slowly she realized he was protecting her. When a shadowy beast prowled near the broken walls, its eyes glowing in the dark, the human lifted his weapon, standing tall, forcing it to retreat while the girl clung to a pillar, shaking. When the danger passed, he turned to her, checking if she was hurt. She blinked, her fear of him now tangled with something new, safety. She whispered again, "Why?" though she knew he could not answer. And still, he gave the same steady gaze, the same gentle nod. That night, as they built another small fire, the girl crept closer than before. She sat only a few feet away, hugging her knees, but no longer pressed against the far wall. The human noticed, his smile faint but real. He pulled another piece of food from his pack, handing it to her openly this time, not placing it on the ground. Her hands shook as she reached out, taking it from his palm. Her skin brushed his rough fingers, and though her body flinched, she did not pull away completely. She looked into his eyes for a brief moment, and for the first time, she saw no hunger there, only patience, only warmth. She ate slowly, savoring the food, her gaze returning to him again and again. Each time, the fear inside her cracked a little more. Each time, the bond between them grew stronger, fragile but steady. By the time the stars filled the sky, she had shifted closer, enough that the firelight danced on both their faces. The ruins around them were still dangerous. Shadows still whispered. Predators still prowled. But for the tiny alien girl, something had changed. She no longer believed the human would devour her. She began to believe he might protect her instead. The human leaned back, his eyes on the stars, his voice soft, as he spoke words she could not understand. Still, the tone was gentle, and she tilted her head, listening as if his voice carried meaning beyond language. She whispered back in her own tongue, words full of wonder. "Maybe you are not monster. Maybe you are, friend." The fire crackled, the night deepened, and the bond between human and alien girl grew stronger than fear. And so, in the ruins of a forgotten world, two lives, one giant, one tiny, began to walk the same path. What started as fear and suspicion was slowly turning into trust, a bond built not on words, but on kindness. And though neither knew what trials awaited them, both felt that together they had found something worth holding on to. The hunters arrive. The bond between the human and the tiny alien girl grew stronger with each passing day. What began as fear had shifted into something fragile but real. She no longer believed he would devour her. But still, she could not understand why he stayed. Why a human, feared across her world, would choose to protect someone so small, so weak. The answer came one evening, when the air changed. The desert wind, that usually carried only dust and silence, began to vibrate with a low hum. The human stiffened, his instincts sharp, his eyes scanning the horizon. The girl noticed the change in him and followed his gaze, her stomach twisting with dread. Then she saw them, dark shapes descending from the skies, ships marked with the crest of scavenger clans. They were hunters of the old world, ruthless raiders who searched the ruins for survivors, treasure and slaves. The girl's body froze, for she knew these were the same kind who had destroyed her village. The human crouched low, pulling her close to the shadows of broken stone. He held a finger to his lips. though she could not understand the gesture. But his meaning was clear. Silence. Her breath came fast, shallow, her tiny hands gripping his sleeve as the ships landed nearby. Dust rose in thick clouds, engines roaring as armored figures stepped out. Their weapons gleamed under the fading sun, their voices harsh as they barked orders to one another. The scavengers moved like wolves, scanning the ruins with hungry eyes. And when one of them shouted, holding up a tracking device, the girl's blood ran cold. "They know," she whispered in her own tongue, her eyes wide with terror. The human could not understand, but he felt her trembling, and his grip on his weapon tightened. The scavengers began to spread out, their heavy boots echoing through the ruins. One of them moved closer, scanning the ground, his red visor glowing in the dust. The girl buried her face against the human's arm, whispering, "Please, don't let them take me." Her voice cracked, filled with despair. The human placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his eyes never leaving the enemy. Though he could not speak her language, his silence promised her safety. The first scavenger stepped into their hiding place, his weapon raised. The human acted fast, swinging a broken piece of metal with brutal force. The scavenger fell with a heavy crash, his weapon clattering to the ground. The girl gasped, her eyes wide at the sudden violence. But the noise drew the others, shouts filling the ruins, beams of light slicing through the dust. The human grabbed her hand and pulled her through the crumbling halls. His boots pounded against the stone, his breath sharp, every sense focused on escape. Behind them, the scavengers gave chase, their voices echoing like thunder. They reached a collapsed corridor, stone and steel blocking the path. The human lifted a slab with all his strength, his muscles straining. The girl slipped through the gap, her heart racing. He followed, dropping the slab, just as plasma fire scorched the wall behind them. They ran until their lungs burned, until the ruins around them grew darker. Finally, they stopped in a shattered courtyard, the girl collapsing to her knees. Her chest heaved, tears streaming down her face. "They will not stop," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They want me. Always me." The human knelt beside her, his hand steady on her small shoulder. He had seen enough to understand. This was no random raid. They were hunting her, not him. And now, by choosing to protect her, he had painted a target on his own back. The scavengers closed in again, their lights glowing through the cracks of the ruins. The human stood, his jaw set, his weapon ready. He stepped in front of her, shielding her small frame with his own. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and disbelief. Why would a human, feared as a monster, choose to fight for her? Why would he risk his life when he could have abandoned her? The answer burned in his eyes, because he had chosen her, not as prey, but as someone worth saving. And in that moment, she began to see him not only as protector, but as something far greater. The ruins shook as another ship landed nearby. Heavier than the rest, the scavengers shouted with triumph. Sure they had cornered their prey. The girl clutched her broken bracelet, whispering prayers to ancestors long gone. The human lifted his weapon higher, planting his feet firmly, ready to stand. The hunters had arrived, but they would not find an easy victim. They would find a human who stood tall, and a tiny alien girl who no longer trembled alone. The first act of kindness had grown into trust, and trust was now turning into defiance. The battle in the ruins was only beginning. Secrets of the tiny girl. The ruins still echoed with the chase, the scavengers' shouts fading into the distance. The human and the tiny alien girl hid inside a half-collapsed chamber. The walls cracked and the ceiling opened to the dark sky. Both were breathing hard, dust clinging to their skin, hearts pounding like drums. For the moment, the hunters had lost their trail, but both knew it would not last. The girl sat against a broken column, her small chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. Tears lined her cheeks, but her eyes burned with something else, shame. She looked at the human, who crouched nearby, ready to fight again if needed. And for the first time, she whispered words that carried the weight of truth. "I am not just anyone," she said in her trembling voice. Though he could not understand, her hand shook as she pulled her sleeve back, revealing the object she had hidden for days. It was a bracelet, cracked and faintly glowing, etched with symbols that shimmered under the moonlight. The human's eyes narrowed. Recognizing it as more than decoration, she hugged it tightly to her chest, her voice breaking. "They hunt me because of this, because of who I am." Her words poured out in her own language, a flood of fear and memory. Though the human did not know her words, he understood her pain, her trembling body, her desperate eyes, and he leaned closer, listening with patience, as if his silence could carry comfort. The girl pressed her forehead against the bracelet, remembering the night her world burned. She saw fire in the skies, soldiers storming her home, voices shouting that her bloodline must end. Her parents had pushed her into the shadows, whispering, "Run! Never stop running!" And she had obeyed, carrying only the bracelet, the last proof of who she was. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I am heir to a fallen house, last of my line." The human could not hear the exact meaning, but he felt it, the way her body shook, the way her eyes filled with sorrow, told him this secret was heavy. And now he knew she was not just a child, she was someone far more important. The scavengers outside were not simply raiders, they were executioners, sent to erase the last spark of her people's royal blood. If she lived, her name could still ignite hope. If she died, her people would stay broken, and somehow, fate had placed her survival in the hands of a stranded human. The girl looked at him with fear in her eyes, not fear of death, but fear of betrayal. "What if you give me to them?" she whispered. "What if you trade me for your freedom?" Her voice trembled, because that was what anyone would expect a human to do. But when she searched his face, she saw something else: steadiness, resolve, and quiet strength. The human placed his hand over his own chest, the same gesture he had made when offering food. He pointed at her, then at the hunters outside, then shook his head firmly. His meaning was clear. "I will not give you away." Tears welled in her eyes, disbelief mixing with relief. For her people, kindness from humans was unthinkable. Yet here he was, bleeding, hungry, hunted, still standing between her and death. Her hands loosened around the bracelet, and for the first time, she held it out toward him, a silent gesture of trust, a gift of her deepest secret. The human touched it gently, feeling the faint hum of ancient power in the metal. Symbols glowed beneath his fingers, alive even after centuries. He looked at her, his brow furrowed, as if asking silently what it meant, and she whispered, "It means I am more than prey, more than fear. I am the last of my kind." The silence grew heavy between them, broken only by the howl of wind through broken stone. The girl lowered her head, ashamed, as if her secret made her a burden. But the human reached forward, lifting her chin gently, his eyes steady and firm. Though no words passed his lips, his meaning was clear. "You are not alone anymore." The girl's tears spilled freely, falling onto the cracked stone beneath her. For so long she had hidden, afraid of hunters, afraid of humans, afraid of herself. Now, sitting in the ruins with this human at her side, she felt something she had thought impossible: hope, fragile but alive. Outside, the sound of engines rose again. Louder this time, the scavengers were regrouping, spreading wider, determined to find her. The human stood, gripping his weapon tighter, his shadow long in the moonlight. The girl clutched her bracelet, holding it close, but with less fear than before. For now, the secret was shared, and the burden was no longer hers alone. She had told him what no one else had known, and he had not abandoned her. Instead, he had chosen to stand taller, to guard her secret as if it were his own. The hunters searched, But inside the ruins, a bond stronger than fear had been forged. The girl had feared the human would devour her. Instead, he had taken her secret, her truth, and carried it with the same kindness he had given food and fire. And with that act, she realized something new. Maybe the human was not only her protector, maybe he was the reason she could survive. War of belief. The secret once hidden was now carried by two. The tiny alien girl had confessed her truth, and the human had accepted it. He did not see her as a burden, nor as prey, but as someone worth protecting, and that choice, quiet as it was, began to shake more than the ruins. They had drawn the attention of the galaxy itself. The scavengers outside had not given up. Their voices grew louder. Their search grew sharper. More ships landed, dust rising like smoke as armored figures poured into the broken city. These were not just raiders now, but soldiers from rival factions, each one claiming they had the right to erase the last heir. The girl sat close to the human, clutching her bracelet with shaking hands. Her eyes filled with dread, for she knew what would come next. It would not be a simple fight. It would be a battle of belief, a test of whether her secret would bring her death or bring her hope. The human stood tall, his weapon crude but ready. He did not understand the languages shouted outside, but he understood the meaning. They wanted her, and they would not stop until she was gone. He glanced back at her, his eyes steady, his jaw firm, and she saw in him a promise. He would not let them take her. The soldiers stormed the courtyard, their armor glinting in the pale light. Their leader shouted, raising a banner marked with the crest of conquest. His voice thundered, "Give her up, human! She is a curse. She is prey. She is nothing." The girl shrank back, her heart twisting, because those words were the same her people had once whispered about her bloodline. But the human did not move. Instead, he raised his voice, his words rough and foreign, but his defiance clear. "She is not prey," he growled. "She is not nothing." Though the soldiers did not understand his tongue, the strength in his stance carried its own language. The girl's chest tightened, tears burning in her eyes. Never before had anyone stood so openly for her. Never before had anyone rejected the lies of power. She pressed her small hands to her bracelet, feeling its faint hum respond, as if it too recognized the human's courage. The soldiers advanced, weapons glowing, belief heavy in their steps. To them, she was a danger, a symbol of rebellion, a spark that could ignite unrest. To them, the only answer was death. But between them and their goal stood one human, unwilling to bow. The clash came swift, blades of plasma striking against stone, beams of light tearing through the ruins. The human fought like fire, every strike filled with determination, every step holding the line. The girl cried out, not in fear, but in strength, her voice carrying through the chaos. "I am not prey," she shouted in her own tongue, her voice echoing. "I am not curse." The soldiers faltered, shocked by the cry. Her small figure glowed in the broken courtyard, her eyes burning, her words shaking the air. The human fought harder beside her, his defiance and her courage binding together. And the soldiers, who had once seen only weakness, now faced something greater, belief. Still, the fight was brutal, the human's body bleeding, his strength pushed to its edge. The girl's bracelet cracked further, pulsing with light she could barely control. But in that light came visions, memories of her ancestors, voices of rulers who had once protected, not destroyed, and for the first time, she believed not only in survival, but in herself. The battle raged until the ruins themselves trembled, stones falling, dust choking the air. At last, the soldiers staggered, some retreating, others hesitating. For every step they took forward, the human and the girl stood stronger. Together, they had turned fear into defiance, and defiance into something unbreakable. Silence finally fell, the courtyard broken, the air thick with smoke. The human stood with his chest heaving, his weapon cracked but still in hand. The girl stood beside him, trembling but unbowed, her bracelet glowing faint. They looked at one another, and in that gaze, both understood what had just begun. This was more than a fight for survival. This was a war of belief, a battle between lies and truth. The galaxy had called her prey, a curse, a burden. But with a human at her side, she was none of those things. The girl lifted her chin, her small voice carrying strength beyond her size. "I am last of my line," she whispered. But not alone. The human nodded, blood on his face, but fire in his eyes. And together they turned toward the horizon, where more battles surely waited. For belief once born does not die easily. And now the galaxy would learn what it meant when humanity chose to stand with the smallest. The war of belief had begun, and in its fire, a bond stronger than fear would shape the future. Humanity's truth. The ruins were quiet at last. Though smoke still curled into the night sky, the human stood in the broken courtyard, his chest heaving, his weapon chipped, his body bleeding. Beside him, the tiny alien girl clutched her cracked bracelet, its glow faint but alive. They had survived the battle. But survival was not the end. More enemies would come. Stronger, hungrier, louder. The girl looked up at him, her wide eyes shining with tears and fire together. She whispered in her own tongue, "Why do you stay? Why do you fight?" He could not understand the words, but he understood her gaze. The way her hand shook, yet reached for him. And in his silence, she found her answer. He knelt before her, pressing a hand against his own chest, the same gesture he had used before. Then he pointed at her, his eyes steady, his meaning clear. "Because you are worth it." The girl's breath caught, her tears falling freely now. For her people had called her a curse. The scavengers had called her prey. But the human called her something greater. They left the courtyard together, moving through the ruins as dawn approached. The first light painted the world in pale gold, a new day rising over broken stone. The girl's steps were unsteady, but she walked close to him, no longer hiding in his shadow. The human kept pace, always placing himself where danger might strike. Soon, more voices echoed across the horizon. The scavengers were not the only ones. Others had come, drawn by the rumor of the last heir. Some came to destroy her, others came to claim her. None expected to find her standing beside a human, and none expected what that sight would mean. When the first of the new arrivals entered the ruins, their banners raised high, they stopped in silence. There she was, small and fragile, yet alive, and at her side stood the human, tall and unbroken. Whispers spread quickly. Some gasped, some cursed. Others trembled, for the story of humans had always been one of monsters. But this human shattered that tale. The girl stepped forward, her voice trembling, but loud enough to carry. "I am not prey," she declared in her tongue. "I am not curse. I am last of my line." Her voice shook the air, carried by courage that came not from blood, but from the bond she now held. And though many could not understand the human's words, they understood his stance. Unmoving, unyielding, ready to fight for her. The soldiers who had come to erase her hesitated, for belief is a fragile thing, and now it cracked. If a human, feared as devourer, chose to protect her, then perhaps the lies were not truth. If a giant stood with the smallest, then maybe the smallest was not weak at all. The human lifted his weapon, not as a predator, but as a guardian. His voice rang rough and powerful, words foreign, but spirit clear. "You will not touch her," he said. "Not while I stand." And though few understood, all felt the weight of his defiance. The girl turned to him, her lips trembling with a faint smile. "You are truth," she whispered softly. "They called you monster, but you are hope." The human looked at her, silent, but the fire in his eyes was answer enough. Together, they faced the gathering storm. No longer hiding, no longer afraid, the scavengers shouted. The armies roared, weapons raised. But not a single one dared take the first step forward, for before them stood not a monster and a victim, but allies, a human who gave when he had nothing, and a child who found courage in his kindness. The dawn broke fully, sunlight spilling across the ruins. The girl lifted her bracelet high, its cracks glowing brighter, fueled not by fear, but by belief. The human stood beside her, his shadow long and fierce in the golden light, and together, they became more than survivor and protector. They became a symbol. The galaxy had feared humans as devourers. But this story would spread. This truth would grow. That one human chose not to consume, but to give. That one human chose not to abandon, but to stand. And in that choice, humanity's truth was revealed. Not hunger, but hope. Not cruelty, but courage. Not fear, but the power to protect. The tiny alien girl, once trembling in the shadows, now stood tall in the light. And the human, once stranded and alone, had found purpose greater than survival. As the armies watched in silence, a new future began to take shape. A future where kindness could break fear, where humanity could turn lies into legends. The girl reached for his hand, her small fingers gripping his firmly. And with the dawn at their backs, they stepped forward together,